Welcome back to part 5 of our series where we are building a trading robot using the TD Ameritrade API. And so previous video, we jumped into another object. That object was the stock frame object. And really the goal with that particular object was giving us a nice, I would say, easy framework for storing data, grouping data, and really getting it ready to do a lot of operations on it. That's really the goal behind it. Additionally, we wanted to add some functionality where we could easily add and select data from that data frame as needed, because part of this trading robot is we're going to be have to grab data, pass it from here, pass it to there, and so on, right? And so now that we have an understanding of the stock frame object, I feel comfortable going into the indicator object, because really the indicator object doesn't exist unless we have a stock frame object. And so even though we have these as two separate files, you would never really have the indicator object unless you had a stock frame object. And so that's what we're going to be covering in today's video. Additionally, I did want to update people. I did do a relatively large push today to the GitHub repo that contains all of this code. And so you will see a lot more functionality than previously. A lot of it is just doing things like making it easy to check for signals, trade execution. So the execution part is actually still in a framework. So even though you can pass through arguments, it's not going to actually execute any trades at this point. And then also just having certain functionality in the sense of, hey, I want to get the latest bar or the last bar, from a particular, symbol or something like that. So again, these are little nuances. You might not think like it's a big deal, but it's actually really important when we're trading, as we have to make sure that we're waiting for the next bar. And then once we have that next bar, we only want to add it to the data frame if there's obviously a new bar to add. Additionally, I did start also adding some functionality to the portfolio object. So you will see things like being able to calculate some metrics regarding the variance. There's also some stuff related to summary. So like a summary of the portfolio. There's still going to be, some changes and stuff like that. But ideally, this will make the process of just getting an overall idea of how your portfolio is performing, certain risk metrics that will ideally be there. And then again, down the road, we will cover this in some videos. But for right now, I'm not going to kind of jump back to the portfolio object only because we've already covered it. But we will talk about it later down the road. And then additionally, I did want to mention it to people because I don't know if anyone actually, because I got an email today from TD Ameritrade, which was kind of interesting. Oh, yeah, and then it was funny, that whole thing with Twitter and the whole like censorship thing, what was it, Section 230? So I started reading the draft approval. So that was kind of interesting as well too, just kind of reading through it and seeing what all that stuff is, but that's for another day. This one, so this is actually interesting. So I got an email today from Thinkorswim, and it's pretty neat. I guess they have a web trading app now. So now you can use Thinkorswim in the web. And so this is actually a pretty big deal because inherently, if you want to do this, you have to basically, have to have an API in order to do this, a web API. So inherently what that's telling me is there's some type of functionality that's going to be in here where they're going to allow you to use the web API or something like that. So I started doing a little bit of exploring behind the scenes just to see, what it would look like and kind of how it would operate. So it's going to be interesting. I have obviously a lot more research to do on this, but, I would encourage some people, if you get a chance, look what's going on behind the scenes, look and start seeing what kind of requests they're making. So like, for example, one was, what was it, the ES and stuff like that. So like future symbols and stuff like that. So it was kind of interesting to see what type of requests were being made behind the scenes. That was kind of interesting. So I guess we'll have to see where this goes. If this might lead to a web API potentially for Thinkorswim, I think that would make a lot of people very happy, but we'll just have to wait and see. Alrighty. So with that being said, let's move on and get started. I'm in the wrong file. Let's jump to the other one. Okay. So at this point, if you haven't already, you want to make sure that you create your indicator.py file. And then once you have, you're going to want to jump inside of it. And so now I'm currently inside of it. Just like all the previous videos, we're going to have to import a bunch of different stuff. So at this point, hopefully you understand what we're kind of importing. But I am just going to pull in some of this stuff. I don't actually intend to use all of it. I think most of it is like the date time stuff I don't need. And then this is going to be the operator module. So this is a module I've never actually used this one before, but it was an interesting one. I actually, when I started looking into it and understanding kind of what it was used for, but it's a nice way where you can use like operation functions. So you can do things like and or greater than or equal or less than or equal. And so they basically define all these functions that you can, or basically like these operators, but they treat them as functions. And so it's very useful. I will say that. And I will tell you that this comes in handy more down the road when it comes to just using certain operations and comparing values. This is obviously very important. Okay, and then from here, we will also import some more typing information. This one we will do optional. That's one we're going to be using. We have any... we'll do tuple. I'll wait off on the other ones. I don't know if I actually use those other ones. So we'll just keep tuple. And then from here, we also do need to import another module from inside of our particular PyRobot module, and that's going to be the stock frame object. And so this is going to be stock frame. Now, you might get import errors here. Don't worry about it. Once you run the setup.py file, you shouldn't have those import errors. But for right now, just because I haven't technically run a setup file or anything like that, it might potentially give you an error. I honestly don't know if this one will or not, but don't be surprised. And then from here, we're going to do our next class. It's going to be an indicators class. So this is going to represent our indicators. So the indicators that we use, that we plan to use with trading. Now, right now, there's only 3. Right now, I'm only doing the SMA, the EMA, and then the RSI. But I will be adding much more to this. But right now, I've been more focusing on like, hey, just get it working. Then we'll start adding indicators, because once you've kind of done one indicator, it's actually pretty easy to do the rest. It's just more tedious than anything. Okay, so we're going to have an init method just like all of our other objects. We have to do some certain operations when we initialize it. And the first thing that we're going to do is we do expect one argument. That one argument is a stock frame object. And then just like all the other init methods, we don't return anything. There's nothing expected to be returned here. But we just kind of want to be a little bit more clear on that, right? Okay, and then from here, we're going to start defining some of our attributes. These will actually be private attributes, and it will make a little bit more sense once you kind of start seeing how I'm defining my properties. But for right now, again, anything leading with a underscore is usually considered private. And so that's a nice, easy way of defining that. And then from here, we are going to say this is a stock frame object. So our stock frame object will be the price data frame that we pass through. Sometimes I've debated if this is actually a little bit necessary. It's weird. IntelliSense sometimes doesn't like it, but then other times it's completely fine. So I always kind of err on just doing it both ways. It might not be technically required, but I don't know. IntelliSense kind of acts weird. And if I don't explicitly state it, sometimes it just doesn't want to do it. And so I've just gone on the whole caution of error and putting it twice. Okay, and then from here, we're going to also have price groups. This is going to be very, 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 very important. This one is going to be the price data frame, and then it's going to be the symbols groups. This is important because we're going to be using a lot of groups when we're calculating indicators. So that goes back to the previous video, which was I put a heavy emphasis on grouping the data. We want to have a single data frame, right? And we want to have a single multi-index data frame. These groups are now already set up for us, so we don't have to do any of those operations in the indicator client itself. They've already been taken care of in the stock frame client. So this is where we're kind of starting to see that benefit help us, where those operations have been done. We only had to do it once. Now we're going to be able to use that benefit multiple times throughout this indicator client. Okay, and then from here, we are going to have another attribute. It's going to be called current indicators. This is actually going to be a little bit interesting. I will hold off talking too much about it at this point. It's a little bit more intuitive once you see it. But the idea here is we are going to be saving input as the user gives it to us. This will be very advantageous because one of the challenges is as we add new rows of data to our data frame, we have to recalculate our indicators. Now, instead of asking the user to resubmit or call each method again, I basically created this kind of like master loop. I don't even know how to say it. Like it's basically like this kind of like wrapper in a sense that will take the indicators that you previously inputted, and assuming that you want to keep those the same, we will use those inputs and then update each of those columns again with the latest data. So this is actually a really important attribute. It's super, super important. Okay. And then from here, we're going to have our indicator signals. And then with this one, this would be something where each indicator potentially could have a signal. We need to specify those signals because it does help us out a little bit. And then additionally, we will have one final attribute that will be the frame object. And then this will be the self stock frame and then the frame object as well. And I guess to be a little bit more consistent, I will probably just, instead of having price data frame up here, I'll change that to underscore stock frame. And then for the most part, that's actually it. These are all the attributes that we kind of just want to initialize when we create our indicator object. And then from here, what we're going to be doing is start going through and defining some of our properties. So the first one that we're going to do is we're going to have the sets indicator signals. Now this one is kind of interesting because with this, the goal is each indicator is going to have a signal, right? There's a buy signal and there's a sell signal. So we need to define that explicitly. And then on top of that, you're going to have a condition, right? So on top of having a signal, so for example, my signal could be 60. I have to go above 60 for the RSI. Okay, inherently, I actually was saying two pieces of information here. I'm saying 60 is my threshold, and I'm saying that I have to be greater than 60. So really, when I'm saying my signal it's really two pieces of information. It's usually a numeric threshold, and then there's some type of operator that goes along with it, right? So I'm saying it's got to be greater than or equal to 60. So my indicator signal is 60, or my buy is 60. And then my condition is that my buy has to be greater than 60. So what we're going to do here is we're going to have a couple different pieces of information that we're going to ask from the user. One is the indicator, so the actual name of the indicator itself. This is a way where we can easily look up that information. Next, we're going to have a buy numeric value. So with this one, we're going to be saying, hey, if you give me the RSI, what is your numeric threshold for a buy? And you're going to give me a float. And then we're going to have a sell threshold. So what is your sell threshold for your signal? And then from here, we now have our numeric operations. Now we need to go into kind of our operations or our operators. So then we're going to have a condition buy. So how do I treat that condition? And then this is actually going to require us to import a new type. So it's going to be type from typing, import any. Basically, it can be anything. Right now, I'm still doing a little bit of research onto what would a operator type look like. I don't know if there's actually an operator type that exists in this module. If it does, then I will be changing this from any to operator because I want to be very explicit. But for right now, my placeholder is just give me anything, but I'm really expecting an operator. So I still have to do a little bit more research on that just to see what it has to be explicitly, but that's really the thing. And then we're going to have another one, which is your condition cell. Again, we're going to have any. And then from here, we're going to say it sets nothing. So we're not going to return anything back to the user. At least I don't think we do. Do we send anything back? No, we don't. So again, the logic here is you're using an indicator. Your indicator has a signal. Your signal is really made up of two pieces. It's a threshold, and usually it's an operator. All right, so my threshold is my numeric value. It's got to be greater than 5. So my numeric value is my 5. And then my operator is it's got to be greater than. It's got to be greater than. So I'm testing for something. I'm checking to see if something is true. If the numeric threshold is met and the operator is met, then we consider that a signal. Now, technically, this is where things can get a little bit complicated because maybe you don't have a cell threshold. I don't know. So right now I'm kind of requiring it. So I'm saying, like, I'm assuming that you want to buy and you want to sell. So technically speaking, I'm expecting both. Down the road, I might not be as strict. I might say, who am I to say? I mean, maybe I shouldn't expect a sell threshold, right? So this is where things could definitely, I'm going to say this is like experimenting a little bit. We're going to have to see if this is really how we keep it. But I'm not going to necessarily rule out the idea of potentially saying, actually, no, you don't need a sell threshold. Who am I to say that you need to sell? Or hey, who even says you need to buy? Why do you have to provide that? Maybe your goal is just to sell it. So I'm going to have to play around with this a little bit where it's still flexible enough that, you know, you can use it for a lot of different operations, but then we also have to follow some type of structure or else it's going to get hard to manage. So once we've done this little simple definition, we're going to do this, which is if indicator is in self._indicator signals, then continue. Or sorry, not in. So if it's not in the self.indicator signals, then what you're going to do is you're going to say self.indicator signals. You're going to pass through the indicator, and then you're going to set it equal to blank. And so the idea here is that you can actually override your signals. And so we want it to be flexible. So I'm not going to necessarily assume that you're going to always want the same signal as it's running. And so this is a way where if it's not there already, we're just going to basically give you a blank template. But if it's already there, then we're going to use the existing one and we're going to overwrite what you previously gave me. So if I had to put it like just in layman's terms, if there is no signal for that indicator, set a template. Basically just use the default value, which is basically nothing. And then from here, modify the signal. So if you didn't have one, you're going to fill out the template. If you already have one, you're going to overwrite the old one that you used to have. And so what this is going to look like is your indicator signals. The first key is going to be your indicator, so the name of your indicator, and then it's going to be buy, right? So it's going to be your buy signal, and that's the buy value that you pass through. I'm going to have to restrict this, right? I can't have people do RSI, but then some people do relative strength index. So we're going to have to standardize this. This is probably going to be some type of enumeration at some point, but for right now, I'm just going to have it left as a string, but I have to force people to kind of follow a rule because it's going to be used throughout the training robot. So I have to kind of keep people structured a little bit. Okay, and then from here, we're going to have our indicator signals, and then our next one is going to be the same thing, but guess what? Now we're going to do the sell side, right? So now you're going to have your sell indicator, and then from here, we can really just kind of copy this a few different times because we're really just doing the same thing. And then this is going to be your buy operator. Ooh. And then this is going to be your condition buy. And then you're going to have your sell operator, right? And then this is going to be your condition sell. So this is how you set your signal. So this is how you tell me, hey, Alex, I want to go use the RSI. Here's my buy threshold. Here's my sell threshold. And it's either got to be this or that direction, right? So this is how you're communicating to me, hey, this is how I plan to use that signal. So if we obviously have a set indicator signals, we're going to have a get indicator signal. And so some people might ask, like, why didn't you just make this like a property, right? So why didn't you just go out there and, just use a property wrapper and then just set the value? The problem is usually with that property wrapper, it expects one value. So what I could do is I could say, well, just give me a tuple, but I didn't want it to be a situation where I wasn't being clear. And I kind of found that, I'd rather not necessarily call it a property explicitly in the sense of using that property wrapper. Instead, what I'm going to say is, let's just kind of treat it as a function right now. It's a little bit easier, I think, for people to kind of grasp it. And then they get that benefit of that IntelliSense. So they can kind of see it and they go, like, okay, so I got to add this, I got to add that. With that tuple, it's not going to tell you. It's going to say like, oh, well, here it is, right? I mean, I guess you could technically do it, but I don't know. To me, this is just a little bit more explicit. And then obviously with this, if we're using the indicator, we should be following some logic up here. This one, on the other hand, though, is going to return a dictionary. Yes, a dictionary. So that's important. And then from here, what it's going to do, so how did I have this logic? Oh, yes. Oh, yeah, that's right. I changed it a little bit. So this one, I actually make it a little bit more flexible. So I say, well, if you don't give it to me, what I'm going to basically do is I'm just going to give you everything back. However, if you don't want everything back, you just have to give me the name. So what I do here is I say, okay, well, if you gave me an indicator and that indicator is in self.indicator signals, then guess what? You can return something back because there's actually something to return back. And so what we're going to do is we're going to return what am I going to return? Self.indicator signals and then the indicator, like that. So that's going to return just that indicator. If you do not give me a indicator, then guess what I'm going to give you? I'm going to give you everything. So I'm going to say, well, I'm assuming you want to see every little thing about your indicator signals. So this is, again, a nice, easy way of setting conditions, adding conditions, and then getting those conditions that you just set. So very useful, very helpful. Okay, I'm going to do a little bit more, and then I'm going to cut it off at this one. And next one, we're going to keep talking about it. So the next couple properties are going to be really the stuff that we've already kind of talked about previously, but we're just kind of adding that functionality now to this. So one here is going to be price data frame. Now, part of this is I think I need to personally go back and rename some of this just to make it a little bit more consistent. So for example, this really shouldn't be called price data frame. It really should be called stock frame just to be as consistent as possible. So you might see some changes along that just to kind of see where it goes. But I'm kind of waiting till the end to kind of clean all that up. But really the idea here is that you're just returning the stock frame that was passed through initially. Sometimes you might want to access it. I'm trying to be as flexible as possible. This is a nice way of doing it, right? And then from here, we're going to do a price data frame. This is going to be the setter. So up above was your getter. This one is going to be price data frame self. And then with this, it's going to be the price data frame as your argument. And then it's going to be your pandas data frame. And then from here, this is going to be none. So you don't send anything back. And then it's going to be your self.frame equals your price data frame. So some people might ask, why this? Why not this? Not really a good reason. I probably at some point will allow that functionality because really with this one, you should have both. I mean, you could leave it as is and you probably wouldn't have any issues. I kind of went a little bit more on the liberal side in the sense of, hey, just add more functionality, because I think, I don't know, I've done some of these videos before and it's like five videos and I'm like, oh man, I wish I would have written that. And now I probably went to the other side with just like, oh, you just keep going, all of it. But yeah, probably at some point I'll also be adding this little stock frame component too. And then just like here, we're going to have that property wrapper. So this is going to really make this an explicit property where we'll have a getter and a setter. So this will be our setter and stuff like that. Initially, that kind of jogs my memory a little bit about why I named this price data frame. Was I think initially I was going to have a stock frame property. So I'm saying, well, I've got to distinguish the two. And I think with this one, I was saying, hey, this is actually a little bit different. This would be the frame of that stock frame. So I don't know. I'll have to look at that a little bit more and see kind of how that kind of all fits into it. And then, yeah, I'm not going to cover that one. That one's a little bit unnecessary at this point. Okay. So I think at this point, I'm actually going to cut off the video, because the next one, I'm going to start getting into the actual indicators themselves. So at this point, I know we didn't cover a ton, but if you have any questions, by all means, ask away. And then the next video, we will start adding the indicators. So we're going to do change in price, RSI, SMA, EMA, and you're going to go, wow, this is really repetitive. It's actually, I wanted it like that, right? You want it where it's super like, oh, it's super intuitive, right? That's the goal. So that's what we're going to be covering in the next video. So again, if you have any questions, by all means, ask away. Otherwise, we'll see you in part 6.